3.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to the weekly weather briefing. And today we'll start out and look across the pond. Germany and Belgium have been hit by flooding, some very extreme flooding. And one of the reasons I show this is that it never fails to just make my eyes pop out that over there they'll get 6 inches of rain in 24 hours and it causes such havoc. And if you've seen the pictures out of there, it's just horrendous. You know, we went through a period ourselves here in the Midwest where we had gotten 6 inches of rain overnight. And we don't quite get this this flooded, and I think it's probably a lot due to the fact that in Europe they've built up so much, and a lot of their streets are kind of narrow, and they, water has almost nowhere to go. But what's the meteorological cause behind this? If we look at the 500 millibar flow, it's very reminiscent of 2010. In 2010, we had a period during the summer where blocking was quite prominent over Western Russia, but this time it's more over Eastern Europe. And of course, that puts Western Europe in a stronger trough, and that sets the stage for low pressures as they come through the Atlantic and into Western Europe, just bringing in copious amounts of moisture. Now, this setup seems to be worse than 2010 in terms of the moisture influx. In 2010, areas of Germany and Poland were flooded, and while Western Russia baked under the heat. So this is not quite in the same position it was in 2010, but it seems like the moisture influx is a lot worse with this event. And so again, a stagnant pattern is the reason for this kind of disaster that's happened in Europe. And we almost see a similar thing happening in our neck of the woods. All right, a very weak, short-lived blocking event that's hung around the date line from about July 9th to July 16th. And again, it's a very weak event, but that just again makes the pattern relatively stagnant, and that's something that we've been talking about all summer with the heat in the northwest part of the United States, and the moisture and cool in the southeast United States, and even a bit in the eastern United States over the last week has had a lot of precipitation. So we're seeing this continuation of a relatively, again, amplified but stagnant pattern here in the US of A. All right, let's bring it to the forecast and look at the results from last week. And let me erase my scratching on there. All right, and if we look at the outcome of the forecast from last week, we see that a lot of folks were projecting in the 60s. Matt, David, you were in the 60s, Michael. Dr. Decker and myself, we were down around 59, I believe. And then you had Paul Roundy at 55, which was a little bit lower. And of course, the 30-year for this period of time was 57.8, or at least the Maxar 30-year. So the actual outcome was 60. So it was just a bit above the 30-year mean, but a bit below, almost equidistant between the 30-year and the 10-year. And that seems to be where the outcomes have been, if memory is serving me right. That's where outcomes have been for about the last 2 to 3 weeks, maybe even a month now. And so that's kind of the hot hand that we've been playing, putting our forecast somewhere between that 30-year and 10-year based on some things that we're seeing with the MJO, the daily SOI index, and CPC's analogs, and looking at the 30-year normals. I'm not sure if I've explained what our daily SOI is yet. And the daily SOI index, of course, is the daily version of what they have out in the Pacific, Tahiti minus Darwin. But what we do is we look at the 24-hour change in that value and the 72-hour change in that value. And if you get substantial changes in that value, it seems to correlate, at least initially, it's correlating with changes over North American weather, or at least changes in the pattern 10 and 20 days out. All right, so in those subseasonal ranges. And we're putting together a paper on this, and we've got we got our first round of reviews, which we're trying to address right now. One of the things about this 24-hour and 72-hour change in the daily SOI is that, yes, it has a 70% probability of detection of these changes in the jet stream in the Pacific Ocean basin. Again, our justification is if you get these changes in the SOI that may reflect changes in the tropical convection in that area in the Pacific, which may then be reflected in the mid-latitude weather. It may have a 70% probability of detection, but it has a high false alarm rate too. So it's kind of a diagnostic that we're looking at as a way to say, okay, keep your eyes open for something happening down the line. And that's what our SOI index is. Again, part of the forecast we build is based on the La Nina analogs. And again, we are post La Nina, but a lot of the CPC forecasts are showing us staying in relatively cold, neutral conditions. And the CPC forecasts are pushing for another or a back-to-back La Nina. And we kind of see that the SSTs are fairly cool. So in order to make our forecast, we've been looking at these post La Nina years, that is the summer of 99, 2000, 2008, 2011, and 2018. And when we look at those summers, 3 of those summers showed heating or cooling degree days in about the range of normal. And then 2 of the summers were hot. So these La Nina analogs seem to want us to push hot weather. We look at the MJO. And if you look at the MJO, where it is now, where it's been, it seems to have been in octet 3 and 4, and the ensemble projections are pushing it into region 5 and region 6. And I recall from some of our discussions earlier I think it was Dave that had put up a product that showed that when this plume gets into this octet, that this tends to be associated with a little bit cooler anomalies over the central United States, or at least the USA in general. And we know that when the MJO gets into these octets, that it tends to be associated with a more active Pacific region jet stream, and it also tends to be associated with more Pacific region blocking. And so that's one thing that I'm looking out for. If we look at what's happened over the last few days in terms of blocking, or let's go all the way back to July 1st if you want. We had that blocking event that persisted over the Northwest United States, a little further east than typical. And that event was associated with that heat dome that gave the West its horrible temperatures. And you can see Europe, the European blocking that I showed earlier, that has persisted over Eastern Europe and may be responsible for the strong rain anomalies in Western Europe. And of course, you can see that the Northern Hemisphere blocking has gotten a little quieter since about early July. We look at since about the 10th, it's been a little quiet blocking wise. And even the model projections keep things quiet in the first 4 days of the forecast. But if we go in the 5 to 9 day, or the late week 1, early week 2 time frame, the models want to put a blocking over Central Asia. And in days 10 to 14, it keeps that blocking over Central Asia. But only a hint of something here in the West Pacific. So maybe an active jet stream associated with the MJO, but it's not looking, or at least the models aren't all excited about blocking. And I wanted to look at the teleconnection indices also. Again, these tend not to be exciting in the summertime, but if you look at what the AO is showing, AO is showing quite a few of the ensemble members getting down below 0. We can see that since about mid-May, the AO has been at least positive or near 0. And in this instance, 2 weeks out, we're seeing quite a few ensemble members wanting to bring the AO less than 0, which hasn't been seen since early May. All right, so it's looking at a more amplified pattern, and I think we're starting to see indications of that with the blocking. The other index that got my attention was the PNA. Several of the PNA members are going strongly positive. And we can see that the PNA was strongly positive in early June. And again in late June when we had the heat over the Northwest. And again in early July, or actually that's just before we had the heat over the Northwest. And a lot of the models are projecting a bit of a heat wave over the Northwest again. So I don't know if this means that we're going to see a repetition of some of the things that we saw before emerge. One other thing that I wanted to bring to our attention, where was it? I wanted to look at what the CPC was talking about for the 3 to 4 week outlook. And you can see that they're keeping it warm in the west, north and west, cool in the south and east, which again has been the prominent signal all winter, wishful thinking here, all summer. But if you look at this pattern, it's almost become a lot more amplified, which is kind of what the teleconnection indices want to show, especially the Arctic oscillation. Previous to this, we've been seeing a lot of these show more of a zonal pattern to this, with heat across the north and west and the cool confined to the south and east. But now it wants to push the, at least the CPC outlook is pushing cooler conditions into the Ohio Valley. And then some of the 6 to 10 day outlooks showing the some strong heat in the central part of the country. And in the 8 to 10 day outlooks showing that above normal for the upper Midwest and the Dakotas. So in the short term, we're showing, or at least the experts here are thinking hot in the Northwest and bleeding into the Midwest, and that at 3 to 4 weeks, that we would switch back to the pattern that we've been seeing this all summer long. This hot Northwest, cool Southeast. And this may be, the timing of this may be coincident with a large change in the SOI that we've been seeing in the last 2 to 3 days. Or at least Joe made me aware of that. So it looks like a temporary switch in the pattern, and then a more amplified pattern later on. Okay, so that brings us to, I want to show the analogs that we've developed. These analogs are based on the NCEP reanalysis. I'm not sure why Joe calls them the CPC extended analogs, because what he does is he has a program that searches for the 10 best matches to today's pattern. And then he'll project out what happened 2 and 3 weeks later and call that our analog. And here's 2 weeks later from yesterday. Okay, and this shows, again, this is kind of agreeing with what the experts at CPC are showing in the short term, warm in the Northwest. But they have this, we show a huge cool anomaly here that's not showing up in the expert forecasts. Week 3, those temperature anomalies, August 3rd through August 9th, settling in the Midwest USA. Again, kind of similar to what the 6 to 10 day and the 8 to 14 day are showing. Sorry about that. I'm getting a little tickle in the throat. But where does that leave us with our forecast for this week? And then we'll have some questions and discussion. And Dave, I'll invite you to show some model stuff. I usually rely on Joe for showing a lot of the good model stuff, and then and then we'll sit and talk about it. And then, but today he can't be with us because of his day job. The period we're forecasting for August 4th to August 8th, that was covered in our week 3 analog that I just showed. The 10-year average is starting to go down and it's right around 57, and the 30-year average is right around 54. And again, we seem to be riding this nice wave of quote persistence, where persistence is doing relatively well. And so again, you can even see it in the forecast that verified the 5-day persistence was positive, the 10, 15, the 30, and the 40 5-day persistence all forecasted pretty good. So again, we've been kind of leaning on that a little bit and playing that hand while it's hot, no pun intended. And our forecast is just about smack in the middle of the 30-year and the 10-year averages, with a standard deviation of 7. So that's where we're at. And you can see that a lot of others are in that neighborhood as well. Michael's there, Dr. Yee is there, David's there. Looks like Chelsea Snide is a new one. Is that a new person in the game? But they've put in 3 forecasts. So.
Oh yeah, Dr. Lupo. Yeah, she. It's a type. There's something there. I'm gonna fix it. But she is new. She just switched her email address, and I think that caused a little bit of a glitch in the system.
And Matt Rogers is there. And if you look at the persistence forecasts, they kind of sit in that range between the at least the 5 to 15 sit in that range between the right
Dr.
around
Lupo.
10-year. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but could you switch your screen because we can't see the forecast word?
Oh, I'm sorry. Let's see. Yes. Oh, okay. I see. I didn't share that one. Okay, so there we are.
There we go. Yep.
And yeah, again, you can see that a lot of people are sitting in that space between the 30-year and hanging out at the 10-year, either in the middle between the 30 and 10-year or hanging out at the 10-year mean. So a lot of folks seem to be playing the persistence game this time, because that's where persistence seems to be sitting. So any questions about about our forecast and some of the things that I was showing? No questions. Okay.
Well, oh, sorry, I was
Yeah.
on mute, but I mean, a couple things on my end. It does. I think you've the cooler themes, or at least less hot themes, certainly from the last few weeks, have certainly paid off. And I think we talked about this a little bit. Was it last week or the week before? It might have been last week, where there were just from a market standpoint. Oh, is that me? Not sure. Someone's playing music.
Let me see if that's, no, that's not mine. So let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen, because it says my screen is paused. Okay, where's my forecast? There we go. All right, are we on the right place?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay, I don't. That was weird.
I don't know
Uh,
what that was.
I don't know.
It,
Maybe that
I,
was on my end. Sorry.
yeah, I can't find it on my end.
Yeah, I was just saying that it's I think it's worth repeating. Like, coming out of June, there were I think a lot of market forecasts. Like Dave Darkangelo was talking about this last week that we're really forecasting a hot July. And the latest number hot relative to, like the 30 and 10-year normals. And, as of today, I think Maxar is predicting that the final July number is going to be a little bit cooler than the 30, or I'm sorry, a little bit warmer than the 30-year and quite a bit cooler than the 10-year. So it's really come in different than I think a lot of market expectations. And I think, like your forecast and a few others have really benefited from seeing that. Others like mine, you can see no, and so there's been some struggles there. And the only other observation I just wanted to point out was when you I think it's interesting so far now that we're about halfway through the summer or so. When you look at the let's see, Dr. Lupo, if you can go to the top of this tab and maybe pull up the click on the the cooling season 2021, sort of the summary button in the
Oh,
top right,
summary.
kind of where it says cooling season 2021.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, this will kind of pull up the summary for the
To
season.
see how folks are doing.
Yeah, exactly. And if you click on any of those headers, it'll sort it. But the thing that stood out to me in looking at this a little bit is if you compare like directional correctness, for example, if you compare how folks are doing this year as a whole, not any particular person, but like as a whole, versus like over the entirety of the contest. Like you don't have to do this at the moment, but if you want, for folks who do, if you go to the where it says all ALL on the top left, you can see directional correctness for summer since the start. And what I found was we're way below. Like directional correctness is a lot lower this summer so far on average. You've got some, big names there that are in the 30s. You've got a lot of people who are in the 50s, and very few people who are,
Yes, we are.
yeah. And usually in the summer, historically in the summer with the contest, it's been where directional correctness, because this is relative to the 30-year normal, where we've really been able, I think there's seasons where folks have averaged in the 80s, like close to 90%. And that hasn't happened so far. And I think that I guess last interesting point, if you click on cooling season, the bottom cooling season 2021 button, though, yeah, exactly. That one includes a little bit more inputs. It includes some of our like research inputs, like the MJO analog.
Uh-huh.
And this is just interesting. I'm not sure how much it means, but if you look at performance versus the consensus, I think one of the MGO analog, I think, is like near the top, one of the top performers here. So it's been interesting that Dr. Lupo, you mentioned this earlier about the fact that you're right, like the MGO currently, empirically, historically, it's kind of in a cooler phase. And, for what it's worth, it's performed pretty well relative to the consensus here so far this summer. So we'll say, I think it's interesting too, what you said about your expectation, just to go back to your expectation, Dr. Lupo, is that if that August as a whole will look like, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Do you think it'll look more like the July pattern or the June pattern?
Well, if persistence holds, my feeling is that it'll look more like July because again, I think the whole game here has been that the pattern has been so consistent. And then again, what was warm for June ended up being cool for July. And so, for August, I think that would tend to be a little bit toward the cool side, or maybe getting down toward average, depending on how long the persistence goes.
Right.
But we're seeing the continuation of that pattern of with some minor breaks, like we're projecting in the next 1 to 2 weeks, some minor breaks, but that general warm northwest, cool southeast has persisted. And the other thing, and I probably should have brought the map up, is show the drought index, although many of us may be familiar with what it looks like right now and just how bad, just how severely dry it is from about the plains onto the west coast. It's just category 3 and 4 drought all over the place.
It's like Michael just shared the link there.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, that's the thing, right? Here, us folks on the East Coast, maybe a little lesser extent, you in the middle, but right, we've yeah, we've had a lot of back and forth this summer in a lot of rain, so we haven't really felt that. But in the northern Rockies and the northern, northwest, yeah, United States, it's just been that ridge has been consistent, right? Um,
Yeah, and it's this chicken and egg thing, it's the dryness, of course, suppresses the cloudiness, and you get a lot more sensible heat contribution. So yeah, they reinforce each other.
you know, well, one other comment too. Some of these things I feel like kind of contradict myself, but it's funny how relative this all is. I was also looking at what the national CDD rankings are just from the start of the season. Whether you start June 1st, a lot of people like to look at June 1st, or if you start May 1st, those are two typical times where we start in the energy community. And regardless, the national CDDs through current rank something like, or I think through the end of July, projected end of July, number seventh hottest since 1950. So, certainly July has not come in as hot as some folks expected, certainly myself as part of that group. But even with that, we're still targeting the seventh warmest start to summer since 1950. And I find that just interesting because, again, it's still obviously pretty hot. And the other thing that you start to wonder, it's like, what would it take to get a summer that starts off not in the top 10 or 15 or even 20, but something like, when are we going to have, or when can we have a summer that starts off in the middle of the pack since 1950, let alone cooler? Is that even in the cards? Like, what's the probability for that when you have this July that kind of feels cool in the eastern parts of the country, and we're still nationally number 7?
Well, and that's a good question, because as I look at the last 10 to 15 years out here and look at the mean temperatures for June, it's almost as if June has become another summer month. If we consider the July and August to be your primary summer months, hottest means, that June is just about joined those two. And it's almost like summer's kind of expanded, which is what we would expect if there's a warming trend.
Yeah, I remember you talking about that in the last couple of weeks too, and I think that's a really good point too. It's like I think this speaks to probably socioeconomic impacts too.
Right.
That period of just where you can have maximum summer heat has, again, I think you're right. Like, it would be interesting to do a statistical study on this, but I absolutely suspect you're right. It's like kind of like the opposite of the studies they do, growing season studies, right? Like in the or similar, like where they certain parts of their country where there's different crops growing,
Yeah,
they'll have those calendars, right, to say, okay, what normally is, how long typically is temperatures above a certain threshold, 32 degrees or 25, depending on the crop, right? And you see those growing seasons changing. And yeah, I think it'd be interesting, because I suspect there's a lot of socioeconomic impact to the idea of getting maybe 90 or 95 plus degree heat in certain parts of the country, instead of getting it for maybe potentially a 3 or 4 week window, where now maybe you have a 10 or 12 week window where you can see some of those kind of temperatures.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because I am a bigger fan of winter than summer.
I, I think a lot of people on the phone are too. Yeah, here. But yeah, I guess Michael or Philip, I don't mean to hog conversations.
Well, yeah, I'd like to hear what
Yeah.
Michael's got to say because when you look at the composite scores, he's doing very well this summer.
What's your secret, Michael?
Yeah.
Well, I haven't been doing too well the last couple of forecasts, so I don't know if there's a secret to it, but usually in the summer, the thing that seems to work the best in my experience is blending the euro and the 10-year, which is what I've been doing for the past, I guess, year now. So that's really my only secret is I guess I have a euro 10-year blend, but hasn't been working too great these past couple of forecasts. Other than that, I'll just since I'm already talking, I'll just go through my forecast here. So like I said, I do my 10-year euro blend. Started off with a base of 59.61 CDDs. Took a look at the CPC forecast, still showing the same general pattern of cool southeast, warm northwest. A little bit concerning with that forecast is that Chicago is basically right smack in the middle of the cold and the warm. So any change by 200 miles from either blob of warm or cold could have some pretty serious implications there, so I have to keep an eye on that. Took a look at the teleconnections. I kind of have moved away from using them in the past couple of weeks. Haven't really gotten too much value out of them. So one thing I did notice is the P&A forecast is all over the place, with one ensemble member going all the way to a +4 and another one going all the way down to a -3, which I thought was kind of funny. But didn't make any changes based on the teleconnections, and wound up lowering my forecast by 1 CDD based on the CPC, just because I didn't like to be I've gotten burned on the last couple of forecasts going too warm, so I kind of lowered it instead to kind of compensate for that. So I wound up at 58.6 CDDs with a normal spread. Any questions, comments, complaints, concerns?
No, that seems like a reasonable strategy.
Also, just a little late on the mentioning this, but I thought the analog map you showed that Joe made with the cold in Canada rather than in the southeast was interesting. At least the cold anomaly on that analog map was interesting, since it's kind of flips from where the CPC and has it, and the cold has been the past couple of weeks or month or so.
Yeah, that was interesting. And of course, that's based on a lot of those past dates that he'll find that highly correlate. But the warmth it shows is pretty compelling and seems to agree with other forecasts. And it looks like another case of where it may be pretty warm, but not where the people are, or not where a lot of people are.
Yeah.
See, Philip, anything you'd like to share on your end?
Yeah, I was looking at the scores for last year, and yeah, I have to say this directional correctness is not something I was expecting for the summer, especially since I remember last year we were all saying how it was we were all saying how it was very easy in the summer to get high directionally correct scores. Just keep forecasting the 10-year and you're probably in good shape. And this year that strategy has been completely blown out of the water. One, I still wonder how much that has to do with the update of the 30-year and the 10-year normals every 10 years, and how much the recent update has changed some of that paradigm. But at the same time, it's also been interesting to see that the temperatures have definitely been a little lower than I think everyone sort of anticipated. And just looking at my numbers, the other interesting one that I've been sort of testing out is the CFS plus 9, also known as our bias corrected CFS. So I maintained my same strategy as last week. So I weight that 15%, and putting all my values, I do still look at the tropical signal, the teleconnections, the CPC, and then the models. And I am currently weighting the 30-year mean 30%, which is my wintertime weighting, as opposed to my usual summertime weighting, in light of the current situation of the 10-year and the 30-year mean. And putting everything together, I got a value of 57.4, which is in between 10 and 30 year. And I have about normal spread at 8.8.
Philip, I just thanks for sharing. I was thinking about what you were saying about the 10-year, and I agree in part. And then there's the other part that Dr. Lupo, do you mind if I share my screen for a second?
Oh, not at all. Please do.
All right, I'm just going to share it. Let me know. Okay, let me know if you guys can't see my screen. I was just thinking, like, looking at the numbers for the 10-year, there's still, well, a couple things jump to mind. One is, like I just mentioned, since May 1st, that from a national CDD, which is what we're forecasting for, again, I think we're targeting like number 7 or something, 7th warmest since 1950. So it's not like, it's not like we're coming in, significantly colder than the 30-year, right? We're not. And then other observation just is, when you look, I think through the various metrics, the Maxar 10-year normal is still doing pretty well relative to the average, right? Relative to the consensus. It's near, it's in the higher end of things. So relative to most people, relative to me, but relative to a lot of people or a lot of the forecasts, it is still on the better end. But I think, now zooming back out, I think part of the issue in terms of the skill, I'm speculating now. This is where it gets less hard evidence, but it's been it's been herky jerky. Like some of the rules of thumb haven't worked as well too. It's like it seemed like in June, okay, I think some folks felt like maybe we were locking into a really hot pattern that was going to continue in July. That didn't happen. So just at the point where you start saying, all right, I'm going to lock into that. I'm going to put a little mustard on my forecast going into July. Wham! You get slammed in the other way. And I think there was a lot of pain, definitely on my end, and from some others, pain in terms of banking on persistence and things like that, and then the forecast kind of going in the wrong direction. And I think sometimes the dynamic guidance also, again, this is somewhat experiential, subjective, but I think suffer from that too in terms of not picking up on pattern changes and things of that nature. And the last thing I just wanted to bring up before we kind of get other thoughts is, again, this is sort of visual inspection. We talked a little bit about this before, but on the left here, I should put them side by side, but I'll just kind of click back and forth. That's the June 500 millibar height anomaly pattern. All right, right there. Now I'm going to switch. This is July to date, July 2021. And what strikes me is, again, from a visual inspection, there's more similarities than differences. And I guess the point I'm making here is, I don't think this was a case. I suspect if someone did some spatial correlation analysis here on June versus July, that it wouldn't be so much that there was a major pattern flip from an upper air standpoint, that the changes were more dramatic than most years. I would even guess if you ask, like, I'd say that the changes were maybe even less. Like it was actually pretty consistent from June, July, but the details matter, right? And in this case, where those changes occurred, putting that stronger weakness, if you will, into middle America into eastern United States had a big difference. It was enough to trigger a lot more rain, a lot more clouds, suppressed numbers, and instead of that ridge, that northwest ridge, which was just able to expand enough east into the northeast to keep it was like, gangbusters hot in the northwest and hot enough in the northeast to produce that record June. I feel like the details, just having that little bit of a stronger weakness in the eastern states, had a big impact in terms of our demand. So again, the bottom line maybe being that the upper air pattern actually was relatively stable, but the changes occurred in just the right locations such that it actually had a big impact in terms of demand. I don't know, just some thoughts, ideas. Anyone else have any comments on that?
David, you're absolutely right. And again, when you look at the Northern Hemisphere as a whole, and I think I was pointing that out in the AO, that the AO has been very stable since about May. And so I think you're absolutely right about that the general pattern has been there. It's just the details. And when people ask me about that, I say, well, that keeps us employed, because if we ever do figure this out, you can have a computer make the forecast. So these kind of errors are great, because it tells us, hey, keep that grant funding coming.
No, I think that's true. And I think the other thought that comes to mind when I see something like this, and this gets a little bit beyond, what probably any of us can do in the next 30 minutes, but there's ways to test this, right? Sensitivity analysis and stuff. And it could, because if I would, it'd be great to know, obviously the spatial correlation thing we could look at, right? And that's one place to start. And then the second part, right, that is, I think kind of what Dr. Lupo alluded to, is this one of these things where, yeah, you can get the forecast, upper air forecast, largely right, but that, unless you can predict these details, you don't know. But I guess, and I'm sort of talking out loud, I'm thinking through this, what would be helpful though to know that maybe you could know in advance that this pattern was very sensitive to slight changes. And that would have been really helpful, I think, from a probabilistic standpoint, to say, you know what, if that trough in the east is even just like 10% stronger, it could have a significant impact on temperatures. And I think that also would be a really interesting study, and something that could be relevant to the markets that I don't think was fully, that I think could be there and found in this analysis, but I don't think too many folks were talking about a month ago.
Oh, absolutely. And I think this might be something where AI might be of value.
Yeah, because it's funny. I mean, it really is like this is all benefit of hindsight and Monday morning quarterback, but that's also how you learn.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, it doesn't seem crazy, right? It's like, okay, you had this massive ridge in the west, ridge in the northeast, but the ridge in the west was much stronger, and there were a lot of but it was dry enough and hot enough that, again, we got a record warm June pattern, largely contributed by the western 2/3 of the country, but enough in the northeast, right, and such. And if that pattern held, that the west was really where the anchor was, and temperatures continued to rise in July. I think, Dr. Lupo, you may have talked about this a couple of weeks ago too, that you would hit that tipping point. Like, even if the pattern doesn't change, you would hit that tipping point in terms of, where you're going to reach that saturation, where you're going to get, where it's going to rain a lot, where it's just going to rain a lot with that kind of setup. And in other words, I kind of look back and I say, was this somewhat even more predictable? Even if I thought the upper level pattern was going to change, that there was going to be a breaking point where the eastern states wouldn't support as much not dry heat, but heat without rain and clouds as it was. I don't know. I look back and I'm like, should I have known? Should I have I've done a little bit, better in terms of seeing this kind of come together. There was a lot. I do remember too. There was a speculation about from some groups. I'm just thinking of different theories that I heard out there that ridge was going to start to transfer more into the eastern half of the country in July. And obviously, so far, we really haven't seen that in any long-term or meaningful way. We did see the models at times try to do that, right? Like there were hints of that in the medium range, long range, and it just seemed like as it came closer to validation, it just never happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And even in the 3 to 4 week, we're returning back to that warm, cool, but it's even more amplified, if you will.
You hear, Dr. Lupo, you were talking about the models here. I know we just have a few minutes left, but we'll take a quick look. Here's the EC. I'll start with the 1 to 5. There's the EC 1 to 5, EC weeklies. There's the 6 to 10.
Oh, wow.
There's 11 to 15.
That looks more like those analogs.
And there's the 16 to 20. So you can see, I guess in the 16 to 20, it tries to shift it a little bit eastward. 21, 25, it looks like it brings it right back. Let's see what the CFS looks like real quick. We'll do that average of the last 4 runs. There's the 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15. 60. Okay, so definitely the CFS in the 16 to 20 doesn't really shift the ridge much. I'll go back to there's the EC. So the CFS is saying not really. There's 21, 25. So I guess we could even look at the monthlies here if you want to look at the monthlies real quick. There's August. Well, there's July, what it was predicting for July. As of July 5th, I guess that's when the season is released. There's August. So it looks like it wants to try to bring more ridging into the Northeast. So we'll see. But anyone have any final thoughts here in our last couple minutes? Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us again, Dr. Lupo.
Oh, you're welcome. And David, we'll talk soon. I've got 16 in the long range class for this fall. So
excellent. Okay, great. Yeah, Michael and I have been working on some more ideas and some suggested guidelines and stuff like that. So it's good timing. I think we're gonna try to get you some more information for you to review, probably like by next week, and then maybe we can chat again. How's that sound?
excellent. Excellent. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. All right, thanks everyone. Bye guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.